My name is Danielle Hawks, and I'm going to be talking about the nature of language and everything that I was able to learn this semester by taking English 175 Writing Intensive. Every native speaker of a language unconsciously understands different parts of their language. The three main general areas that are included in a language are the sound system, the lexicon, and the grammar. Native speakers are aware what sounds are and aren't a part of their language inventory. For example, English speakers have trouble with pronouncing the trilled R sound in Spanish, and likewise for Spanish speakers, having trouble pronouncing sounds that aren't in their vocabulary, like the th sound in the word three. Native speakers also know where certain sounds can occur in words more unconsciously. For example, English native speakers know that there are combinations of letters that start words but cannot end them, as like dwindle or street. Native speakers also recognize sounds depending on where in the word it occurs. For example, where the letter is in a word changes the way one pronounces it even though they are the same letter. Pan and taped are examples of the same letter that sound different when placing it in a different part of a word. The second area that native speakers understand is the lexicon of a language, otherwise known as the human dictionary. The word usage varies by environment, education, job, social groups, etc. Native speakers know that there are variation for common words. A good example of this was shown in a video in class which surveyed people from different areas of the United States and asked different people what they called certain things. One of the questions was, a carbonated beverage is. Different answers varied from pop, soda, and Coke. Different areas and groups of people have different words for the same objects. Native speakers also know slang and idiomatic expressions and what's literal and what is not. For example, we all know that when someone says, "What's up?" they are not literally meaning what is above you, they're asking how you are doing or what you are doing. The last area that native speakers understand is the grammar of a language. Native speakers know how words and phrases are combined together to make sentences. They also have implicit knowledge of sentence structure rules without ever learning them. The only time that native speakers become aware of unconscious knowledge is when they have to learn a second language and learn the sentence structure and word order in that language. The sound system, lexicon, and grammar play very important roles in what every native speaker understands about their language. There are many similarities and differences between animal communication and human communication. One of the main differences is displacement. Displacement is the ability to communicate about things that are not present in space or time. For this to occur, speakers can refer to past or future events, express hopes or dreams, and talk about imaginary things. The main things that animals communicate about is survival. Also, animals cannot communicate using arbitrariness. Arbitrariness is a form of a symbol that is not directly related to its meaning of function or when spoken words do not equal the object they represent. It basically is a different word for the same meaning, which animals cannot express. Animals do not have a different sound for the same meaning. They actually have smaller ranges of communication, and certain sounds and motions mean one distinctive thing. The main form of animal communication is the pragmatic function, which is a communication system that must serve a useful purpose. Animals also use the pragmatic function for survival. Animals do not have the complexity and discreteness to make complex messages that are built out of smaller parts. Animals do not have the ability to learn another language, unlike us complex human beings. Some similarities of human and animal communication are that humans and some animal communication systems use cultural transmission. As Mrs. Peterson described in lecture, we learn a lot about our language by using examples from other people. A species that is similar in this aspect would be apes or chimpanzees. Another thing we have in common with animals is pre-verification, which is the ability to lie. The video we watched in class showed us that squirrels use this method to scent themselves in snakeskin to trick their predator. Animals can only talk about a limited set of topics, while ours are endless. Every species has their own way of communicating. Acquiring our first language is usually effortless and easy because we grow up hearing and learning about it. Second languages aren't so easy. There are two theories that cover the different aspects about learning a language. The first one is the behaviorist theory. B.F. Skinner was the theorist who discovered this and believed that babies are born with a blank slate and language is learned by repetition and reinforcement. Parents play a large role in children's learning, yet the imitation of parent is a problematic theory. This is known to be problematic because of the poverty of the stimulus theory, which states that the input that parents provide is too limited and error-filled for children to create the complexity they do so well. The second theory is the innateness theory, created by Noam Chomsky. Chomsky believed that the brains of all children are biologically set up to recognize the patterns of whatever human language to which they are exposed. The innateness theory also dealt with describing language and principles, speakers, outputs, and mental competence, and that the brain is a language acquisition device. As for second language acquisition, it is much harder to learn a second language. It seems like it'd be easy and convenient to learn a second language because second language learners have control when they want to acquire a second language. They also have access to learning strategies and are capable of reasoning and questioning. The sad truth is that it is actually harder to learn a second language because around the time of puberty, the corpus callosum, which is a set of neural pathways between the two hemispheres of the brain, begin to harden. The flow of neural activity between the two hemispheres becomes limited, which makes learning a second language very difficult. Although it is difficult, it is still possible. The evolution of language and how humans evolved the language is unknown. Evidence suggests that language has evolved as an extra brain molecule and includes the brain as a language acquisition device. Most researchers agree that humans have specially evolved something that enables them to learn languages easy. Certain brain areas are indeed necessary to learn a language, and the same areas of a brain are needed for other tasks such as memory. Letterization plays a large key role in the brain and language. Lateralization of function refers to the idea that each hemisphere of the brain is specialized for different functions. Each hemisphere controls the collateral side of the body. There have been tests ran called decadic listening tests that measure the time to identify a task. The test results show that language sound was processed more quickly by the right ear, which is controlled by the left side of the brain, and that non-language sounds presented to each ear were more quickly noticed by the left ear, which is controlled by the right side of the brain. As mentioned earlier, everyone is born with a corpus callosum, and if it is damaged, it can interfere with the exchange of information between the hemispheres. The two areas of the brain are known as the Broca's area and the Wernicke's area. The Broca's area is a part of the frontal lobe of the left cerebral cortex near the motor cortex. The Broca's area interprets information received from the accruent fasciculus and transmits articulatory information to the motor cortex. The Wernicke's area is the region of the brain located in the cortex of the dominant temporal lobe. This is activated when accessing the lexicon and when interpreting lexical entry. Damage to either area of the brain can affect one's long-term ability to speak words, hear words, or even read words. When the area is damaged, it is known as either Broca's aphasia or Wernicke's aphasia. Individuals with Broca's aphasia can express meaning, but speech is slow and drawn out, and speech requires a lot of effort. Many people with Broca's aphasia get frustrated very easily and cannot follow conversations. When one has Wernicke's aphasia, they can produce fluent and rapid speech with good information, but the speech is not meaningful. Usually, these people have difficulty naming objects presented to them and use random word substitution and neologisms. We watched a video in class of an older woman who had Wernicke's aphasia, and she kept stuttering and had trouble understanding what the other person was talking about. Every part of the brain has a different responsibility. There are many aspects that go into creating a language and the way it is structured. Some of the structures include phonetics, morphology, word formation, syntax, and grammar. Phonetics is a branch of linguistics that studies sounds of speech occurring in human languages. There are many different types of phonetics, which include acoustic phonetics, articulatory phonetics, and auditory phonetics. Phonetics explains how sound is produced when air is set in motion. For example, for consonants, sounds are made by obstructing the airstream in differing ways after it leaves the lungs. For vowels, airstreams is never blocked or even seriously constricted by any of the articulators. There is a phonetic system that specifies exactly which sounds to pronounce for each letter and how they should be pronounced. The next structure of language is morphology. Morphology is how we structure words, how they are categorized, and the word formation processes. There are numerous ways to make new words. Some of the processes are acronymy, blending, borrowing, clipping, coinage, compounding, derivation, gentrification, morphological misanalysis, and reduplication. A couple that we see more commonly would be blending, clipping, and compounding. Blending is when you take two words and blend them together to make one. Like lunch and breakfast equals brunch. Clipping is cutting off part of a word to make it shorter. For example, clipping mathematics to math. Compounding is the joining of two free morphemes to make a new word, like download. Syntax and grammar are the last structures of a language. Syntax is the arrangement of words and phrases to create well-formed sentences in a language. Every language has different forms of how they structure their sentences. Every sentence consists of a subject, a verb, and an object. Depending on what language you speak, the word order could be SVO, SOV, VSO, VOS, OSV, or OVS. Sentences are categorized by phrases and heads, noun phrases, verb phrases, prepositional phrases, adjective phrases, and adverb phrases. The classification depends on where the certain word in a sentence is and how it is being used. One can easily identify syntax by drawing a tree structure for different types of sentences. There are many structures of language to follow, and it is important to realize how complex languages really are. Semantics involves how people think and understand the meaning of a word. This is relevant to native language speakers and what they know about the words they are speaking. Semantics includes a number of different categories that native speakers understand about meaning. Some of the categories are synonymy, antonymy, polysemy, homophony, levels of specificity, meaning inclusion, jargon, argot, phrasal verbs, idioms, and slang. It takes someone a long time to understand the semantics of a language and what all the different words mean in different contexts. Polysemy is when words with closely related forms are derived from the same meaning. For example, a ballpark. Many people use the phrase, "that's right in my ballpark," when they like something or it fits their taste. Every native speaker knows and speaks using the different meanings of their language without even thinking about it. On the other hand, pragmatics involves a conversational aspect or interaction with someone else and how we speak to them. In pragmatics, there are many different speech acts. Some of them are representatives, commissives, imperatives, interrogatives, expressives, and directives. One that I see more commonly is a commissive, which is when the speaker is committed in some way to the truth of the statement made or is committed to some action in the future. An example of this is when someone says, "I assure you that Tom has left." They are ultimately promising you something without saying, "I promise." Something that is also part of pragmatics in a huge way is euphemisms. Euphemisms are an indirect way of expressing difficult or uncomfortable concepts. We use them to discuss topics like death, illness, pregnancy, and war. When people talk about death, many people say things like, "they passed away," or "they dearly departed," "he bit the dust," or "they went to a better place." There are terms like this for lots of different topics. There are many beliefs about electronic mediated communication and how it affects people in this world. Some of the myths are that social media makes people illiterate and unable to express self through writing. Another myth is that people that use dialect will be unable to write properly or express clearly in places that are not local contexts. People also believe that written language standards will decline with the new technology and communication. This is clearly not the case. The reality is that students know when to use formal/informal language and for different purposes. People understand language enough to use abbreviations and that people who text can write just as good as people who do not text. Electronic mediated communication has many different types of abbreviations. People abbreviate using emoticons, pictographs, and acronymy. Emoticons are a type of logograph that provides readers important information about the tone of a message. Pictographs are actual pictures or shapes representing a word or a concept. Lastly, acronymy is when each letter of an abbreviating represents the first letter of a whole word. For example, OMG equals oh my gosh. LOL equals laugh out loud. WU equals what's up. And INBD equals it's no big deal. A bad thing that comes from electronic media communication is the social etiquette. More and more people have been texting while on dates or with friends. This can show signs of boredom or that something else is more important. Electronic mediated communication should not be viewed as a bad thing, though. It is just a new way to communicate. Teachers, educators, and parents should study more into it and enhance the language of electronic mediated communication and use it for educational purposes. Language and technology is always advancing. We just need to find new ways to embrace it. Language is constantly changing every day. Some of the changes include lexical and semantic changes, sound system changes, and grammar and morphology changes. For the lexical and semantic changes, modification is happening, some being permanent and others being temporary. These changes happen like a ripple effect. It starts close to the center and slowly spreads out across the different groups of people. The sound system is changing constantly as well. Grammar and morphology usually begins in speech of one dialect group and only eventually comes to be incorporated by speakers of standard varieties. Some of the examples of this are adding the suffix ly, idiolects, and saying who instead of whom. Also, many people think that language and dialect are the same thing. Language is all the possible varieties of a human communication, and dialect may or may not have different names, but are related in important ways and similar enough to be grouped together as parts of one language. Different language variation is also occurring among different groups of people. A large ethnic variety is African American Vernacular English. African American Vernacular English is a background of people who speak the same dialect. It's not a social class or location. It's a group of systematic language varieties spoken by many Black Americans and others throughout the United States. One does not have to be Black to speak the African American Vernacular English. Some of the examples that this language makes are deleting the final consonant, switching of consonants, and using double negatives. There are many aspects that go into the making, changing, and keeping up with a language. Language change is unpreventable and ever changing. This class has taught me so much about different areas of English, ways we communicate, and made me realize things that I've never even noticed that I know. Most of the language structure we know/use, we do it unconsciously or without thought. English 175 Writing Intensive was a great in-depth course to learn more about language and how it is used.